Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Woo. Awesome. So great to see so many people I love in one room. This is really awesome. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about app security. And we're going to show a few examples and bring a few partners to speak about how they run security. Let's start by talking about me a little bit. So this is me. My name is Amir Shevat. I'm the head of developer relations. My team does everything from writing the documentation, creating samples and tools, all the way to working with you partners to create great integration over Slack. So let's talk about our agenda today. We're going to talk about a little bit about the architecture, so we can talk about what are the security constraints, and then talk about securing your servers. Then we're going to talk about securing the barrier between your servers and ours, and talk about tokens. And then we'll dive into logic and securing the logic of your app using permissions and also two-factor authentication. And then we'll have time for a little bit of Q&A. And we'll also talk about how do companies use Slack to actually run security incidents. OK, so this is an architecture of a standard app. When you say Slack app and you say install an app, it's actually a little bit misleading, because there's nothing that gets installed on the Slack client. A Slack app or a bot is actually a hosted entity. So you host your code on AWS or Google or whatever you see fit on your servers, and you actually use API to call us, and we send you events. So there's no direct communication between the Slack client, the native client on desktop or on mobile, and your servers. So there's a little bit less attack vector than if you would have an actual native installation on the client. So we'll talk about securing your server, your part of the deal, and we'll talk about securing the events and the way we authenticate you and the way you authenticate us. And then we'll talk a little bit about like securing your logic in your app. OK, so again, this is what we're going to focus on: securing your server, securing the connection from and to Slack, and securing your app logic. Let's dive into this. In order to talk about securing your server, I want to invite Max from our security team to talk about vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. I'm Max Feldman. I work on the product security team at Slack. So I work on our feature reviews, I run our bug bounty, and I also do some of our app reviews. So if you've ever submitted an app to our app directory or gone through that security review process, I may have been the person reviewing it. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to secure your server and general web application vulnerabilities, because this is a huge chunk of the general security of Slack, is the security of our partners. We have mutual customers, so we want to hold all of ourselves to high standards. So OAuth is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a consortium that publishes a list of the top 10 most critical web application vulnerabilities. So these are ranked by how common they are, how much they can impact your server. They range from misconfiguration of your server to complete takeover by an attacker. So we're going to highlight a few of those on the next two slides. And the key takeaway that I want you to think about in the future, and when you're thinking about securing your application, is how can you think like an attacker? How will someone try and abuse your service? How will they try and abuse the bot or the application you've written? Because they will try and abuse it. And the more creative you can be and the more you can think like an attacker, the more you can prevent an actual attacker from doing malicious things, stealing your data, affecting your customers, and impacting your business. So a few of the OAuth top 10 that we're going to talk about. And also, if you Google OAuth top 10, you can find the full list of these. There's a 2013 list, and there's a 2017 list that's under consideration. The number one issue on both is injection. So this is an attacker injecting and running code on your server. This can include SQL injection. If you don't sanitize your SQL inputs, this can include remote code execution. And what you want to think about is, where is user input coming into your server, and how can you prevent it from being run as actual code? So the next one is broken authentication and session management. And this refers to vulnerable implementations or handling of how users are authenticated, how authentication is managed. Most web application platforms offer some type of authentication as part of it, so you shouldn't need to roll your own. You shouldn't need to implement cookies or tokens or things like that. There are a lot of existing solutions there, but you want to make sure that your tokens aren't weak, that you have things that are unguessable so that a user logging into your server or to your application is actually that user. The next one is cross-site scripting. So this is an issue that takes place in the client side, and this is unsanitized JavaScript that runs in the client. So if you have a forum or something and you take user input and a user inputs some HTML and then some script, and they say, oh, JavaScript, like fetch document.cookie, send it off to evil.com. If your website isn't careful about how you're parsing that input and sanitizing it on the page, you've basically given attackers the ability to write arbitrary HTML and JavaScript to your web page. So a way you want to think like an attacker here is, how would an attacker try and inject something malicious into your page? How do you prevent script from running when it shouldn't be running? So the next thing we're going to talk about are insecure direct object references. And these are insecure or unauthenticated references to an object directly. So a little tautological explanation. But so you might have a file or a key on your server. So /file, and the file ID is 1234. If the next file ID is 12345 or 1235, an attacker will go and enumerate all of those. They'll go to every endpoint. They'll go to /admin/key/token and see what files are accessible. So you want to make sure that you're actually protecting these things with strong authentication. If you have a file hosting service, for example, you don't want every file ID to just be incremental. You want it to be unguessable. The next is security misconfiguration. This is a general vulnerability. Type servers and applications that are configured insecurely. They might be running outdated components or have insecure default settings or credentials enabled. If you leave admin as a login to your admin portal, that's an example of security misconfiguration. So you want to make sure you follow best practices. And the last of the OWASP top 10 that we'll talk about is sensitive data exposure. And this is when you're lacking protection of sensitive data. So user passwords, secret information, things that you're storing. You don't want to store that in plain text. You don't want to have your server be just one big text file of your user's information, their social security numbers, because then if you get hacked and those things are in plain text, it causes problems for a lot of people. So these are the things you want to keep in mind when you're working on the security of your own server as it fits in as a Slack application, or just as your web application in general. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Amir to talk about tokens.
Thank you very much. OK, so we secured our server. And now we need to secure the connection between your server and the Slack servers. And how do you do that? The first thing is actually not in this slide. The first thing is SSL. This is a strong recommendation. Please use SSL. If you're building a Slack app that anyone can install, we actually enforce SSL. But if you're doing a custom integration, we don't enforce it, but we highly recommend that you use SSL to encrypt the communication between the Slack servers and your integrations. Then there's the tokens. The tokens help us confirm the identity of you as the person calling the API, and also giving you the ability to authenticate us. So the first set of tokens is the access token, the OAuth access token. That's the XOXP. And then there's the bot token, the XOXB. Both tokens let you call our API. And we use that token to understand what are the permissions that you could do when you're calling our API. You access these tokens through an OAuth process if you're building an app that every team can install, or you get that in the configuration page when you have an internal integration. Then there's the verification token. The verification token is a token that you use to identify us. So whenever we send you an event or any other call, you can use that token to verify that it's actually coming from the Slack servers. And as you can see, you can regenerate those tokens if you think that the token has been compromised, and we'll be immediately starting to use the new tokens. OK. This is another feature that we released a few weeks ago. It's IP whitelisting. So if you have an internal integration and you want to limit the servers that will be allowed to interact with the Slack API, so you can add those IP ranges into the IP whitelisting, and we will not send events or receive calls from anything other than those IP ranges. So check those out. So these are the way to secure the communication between your servers and Slack. Okay, so let's dive into securing your app logic. Securing your app logic is super important. I'll give you a simple example. You have an integration with a CRM, and you do a /account and the name of the client that you want to fetch information. You might not want to fetch the information for every type of client, right? You might want to fetch more information for the account managers in your team than for the rest of your team, right? So you need to have a set of business logic permissions embedded in your application. And the key here is how can you map between our users in Slack, the users who are trying to access your app, and your permission model. And the way to do it is actually to create a mapping between the users in Slack and the users in your system. So the first thing you do is create the mapping, and then you manage the permissions on your end. And to talk a little bit about how to do that, I want to invite Chris from Concur.
Hello, hello, yeah. Thanks, Amir. So I'm Chris from Concur Labs. We are part of Concur, an SAP company. And we built a Slack bot which lets you submit and approve expense reports. So our approach to security is pretty straightforward. The picture on the right you're seeing right now is basically a user trying to ask a Concur bot in Slack whether trying to issue commands, but at this point, the user would not, or the bot would not know yet whether the person is logged in or not. So we're checking a token, a Concur token, if it exists on the database. And then when that token doesn't exist, it kicks off an OAuth process, and then at the end of it, we get a token back, which we then associate with a Slack user ID. So the approach to security is pretty straightforward. First, and this is in no particular order, all user info is encrypted. So whatever we save on the database is encrypted. We're using pretty standard encryption libraries, so it's pretty straightforward. Make sure no one can eavesdrop on your communication, so secure HTTP in your communication, as mentioned by Amir as well. And then we're using our own OAuth implementation. We have in our API, Concur APIs, we have the OAuth 2.0 implementation, so we're getting a Concur token back. So we're using that as well. So if your company has an OAuth or API, you could just use OAuth. And pretty common sense, never pass user ID in the clear. So as you can see in the, there's a link there called Concur, link Concur account. It's actually a full string which kicks off the OAuth process. We're passing a state parameter, which you can use to map back to a Slack user ID. So instead of using a user ID straightforward, you might want to use, in this case, we're using random text, and then we're hashing it, and then sending it back as sending it out as a link. So when we get it back, we're going to be getting back Concur token associated with a Slack user ID, and then we're dropping that token off the database. So we're just using it for the authentication process. The other part of our approach to security is making sure you partner with your security team early and often. As developers, most of us are kind of, or myself, I'm kind of lazy in terms of security. We're kind of fortunate enough to have a security team who can handle all of the steps and processes, making sure our services are up to production quality. So make sure to partner with your security team. We also have a feature in Concur which lets company admins to control what their users can integrate with. So for example, if you're from Lyft and you don't want your employees to use Uber, we could actually, the company admin can turn on a switch and say, if someone from our company tries to use Uber, alert me, or maybe give him a response. So the point here is, if there might be some features in your company that you can use, or in your product that you can use to utilize those extra layer of security or authorization. The other, which is in our roadmap, is GDPR compliance. GDPR stands for Global Data Protection Regulations, is from the EU. And we're on our way to being GDPR compliant. And for us, it's not about just being secure. It's also a selling point for our product. So if we can tell our clients and customers that, hey, we are GDPR compliant, then it puts them at ease and makes, it's kind of a selling point for our sales folks and other, or the product itself. So those are the few things that we have security-wise: common sense security, standard practice, and then making sure that you are partnering with your security team early and often. So that's us.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks, Amir.
Cool. I really like the example of mapping between the users in Concur and the users in Slack. I just want to go back to, there's like a pro tip. You can actually use the same model to show different things. So as you can see in my example, I can do a / command, show my bugs. So once you have the mapping between your users and your own system and the users in our system, it's not just a matter of security, it's also a matter of like showing the user the real perspective of that user within your servers. Okay. I want to show you another cool example that really blew my mind when I saw it, and that's from Netflix. So Netflix uses Slack for managing their GitHub repositories. They have a project called Hub Commander. It's actually an open source project that lets you, as a team, use Slack to manage your GitHub repositories, to create new GitHub repositories and to manage them. But the problem that they encounter is some people wanted to delete GitHub repository, which is something very risky. So what they added is the ability to add a two-factor authentication. So here, as you can see, somebody is trying to delete a repository, and then the bot, the integration, calls Duo. And what the next thing that happens is that the user who ran that command gets a Duo challenge on their phone. Once they accept a challenge, the bot gets that event, the integration gets that event, and it goes and continues on the operation. So I really like this example because it shows you that you can have complex business logic and even risky operations that could happen in Slack, and you can use a two-factor authentication to have an additional layer of security on top of your integration. But using Slack for security is another interesting story. So I want to invite Steven from Okta to talk about how they use Slack to actually manage security within their company. Great. Here you go.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon. So everything that's been mentioned so far, right up my alley, right? Talking about identity mapping, talking about, strong authentication when people are doing certain things. And if you look at, Okta as a product, as an identity management product, we certainly facilitate that with our integration with Slack. But I want to sort of take this up even one more level, right? Go really macro and think about security overall. And I want to talk a little bit about security operations. So SecOps. What SecOps is, and at some point this will come back to Slack, but bear with me. Security operations is a pretty important discipline for a lot of big companies, right? It's really focusing around compliance, around knowing what's happening within the company, be able to reduce risk and things like that. So identity and access management is a key piece, right? Centralizing your identities and the policy so that you have a pretty good visibility around how people are accessing various resources. The ability to deal with governance and compliance, right? Knowing that your company is compliant to various types of regulations. At some point, GDPR was mentioned earlier. Next May, after that, you need to make sure that, if that is applicable to you, you need to make sure that everything is tied to those policies. Risk management, mitigating risk. Can you completely remove risk? You can never do that. There's always going to be risk, right? So the key thing is how to manage it, how to mitigate it. Security analytics, right? Really look around the enterprise, how people are accessing things, what sort of devices are people using, where are people coming in from, different personas, and all those kind of things. So having good visibility to be able to use that data for various things. And then threat intelligence and incident response. This is sort of the last bit of it, right? How do you detect problems? And then if there is indeed a problem, what's the workflow that you go through, right? So, all this, I'm sure, is educational. You're probably asking, what does this have to do with Slack? Well, here's an example of something that we actually showcased about 2 weeks ago at our conference, which is a SecOps environment where you have Okta managing various types of cloud apps, and events and activities are all piped to Sumo Logic as an analytic product. And then ServiceNow, with their SecOps module, is actually being used as a security incident response mechanism. So the cool thing is, when you think about these different products, you're naturally thinking, well, I guess I'll get an email notification if something goes wrong. I'll get another notification from ServiceNow if there is indeed an incident. I'll log in and then click on a link and go to the respective products and do my thing. I mean, that's all really cool. But what's really amazing is with very little work, we were able to take this entire SecOps analyst experience and basically have it within Slack. So imagine if you're an IT team and your SecOps team, everyone is sitting in a Slack channel, and you're working. And as the incidents are coming, as Sumo Logic is able to detect various anomalies, those things are actually coming in via Slack. So I don't have to be jumping around. In fact, I guarantee you most people that are in a Slack channel are probably more alert with what's coming through the channel than checking their emails and stuff like that. So I'm getting the same level of information. I'm getting notified by the system because of the integrations that are there. But what's more important is within the environment, and we've actually built a bot through an SI firm, very quickly was able to develop that hook between Okta and Slack. And you see here, within this environment, I'm able to dive deeper into this incident, right? I'm able to figure out who the user is, additional information about the user. So why is all this important? If you think about the environment where you don't have Slack as that collaboration platform, you're going to be jumping around, going from places to places. Worst case scenario, you grant access to a SecOps person to look at something, but it's actually way more access than he or she really needs. Slack gives me that platform and that environment where I can have really good control over delegated administration, and I'm able to basically do everything from within this environment. So this is just one example of how, we've talked about security within Slack. We've talked about how Concur is leveraging it. This is another way of looking Slack from a security angle, how to actually leverage it in a security environment. And for the developers out there, I definitely encourage you to look for opportunities where these kind of integrations can happen, because it's super valuable. And I think this platform makes it very easy for you to build these type of integrations and have a very quick go live. So that's it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I really like this example because it shows you that you can actually take action in Slack on security incidents. So I think that taking action inside Slack for a workflow is pretty awesome. Okay, so we talked about using security to secure your server, and then the connection between your servers and Slack. And then we talked about app security in terms of your logic, and then using Slack in order to actually run security incidents. Let's talk a little bit about the future. So what's coming soon to a theater near you? We're working on a new type of token called XOXA token. That's a workspace token. So if you're familiar with XOXP, which is the perspective of the person who installed your integration, and there's the token of the XOXB, which is connected to the bot user that you installed into a team. XOXA is actually a decoupled token that has a relationship between the token and the team itself. So it solves things like the person who installed the bot now, or the integration now leaves. Thank you. It was very, very well requested by you. So when a person leaves the team, all their integration doesn't go away. So this is a new token, and you can actually access it today through the beta program. And then we're thinking about how do we take sign-in with Slack into the next level and help you do better mapping between your users and our users. So this is coming up soon, and we'll be very happy to hear what you want more. So now the key takeaways. Secure your server, secure the connection, secure your app logic, and use Slack for security. Thank you very much. You're awesome. And if you have questions for me or for any of the people who presented, that'll be awesome. You want? Yeah. Chris, do you want to join us? Or we can stand here awkwardly for 5 minutes if you like.
There's two right here.
Yep.
Great question. Where did Larkin go?
I want to repeat.
Oh, Larkin left. So I think that there is a talk after this that talks a little bit more about Slack's security and compliance by Larkin Ryder, who runs our risk and compliance team. She was just in here. She probably left to go prep for that presentation. It's, I forget which track it's in. I don't think it's in Integrate, but that would be a good place to ask. Larkin knows what our roadmap for that is. But it is on our mind. We are doing things about it.
Okay, cool. I think we're done. Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.